Welcome to Dark Whispers. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretch like an ancient spine across the land, serene, misty, peaceful at first glance. People come here seeking quiet, a cabin getaway, a hike far from the noise of the world, a chance to breathe in pine and fog and forget the rush of life. But there are corners of the Blue Ridge where the air thickens, where shadows feel old in the trees, and where sounds linger just a little too long. Locals whisper that the mountains don't just exist. They watch, they remember, and sometimes they call back those who wander too close to what should never be disturbed. This story begins with Rowan Harker, a hiker known for his stubborn independence. He'd spent years exploring trails most people avoided, places that never made the tourist maps. This time, he chose a route circling Devil's Backbone Ridge, a jagged rise with a reputation for swallowing fog and unsettling even experienced hikers. Rowan liked that. He said fog made the woods feel alive. But on that particular morning, he found something he'd never seen before. Fog rolled in unnaturally fast, thick as wool, muffling every sound. Even birds went silent. Rowan took shelter in an old cabin he'd never noticed on any previous trip. Its roof sagged, and its door creaked like a wounded animal. The inside smelled of dust and mold, nothing unusual for an abandoned mountain shack. But then came the breathing. Slow, wet, uneven, not animal breathing. Human, or something mimicking human. Rowan's flashlight beam trembled as he moved it toward the back room. Instead of a person, he saw only a hand, long, skeletal, with paper-thin skin stretched over protruding knuckles, pulling itself behind the door frame, not retreating with fear, but slipping out of sight like it had been caught watching him. Rowan froze. His throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs refused. Then a whisper floated through the stale air. "You came back." But Rowan had never been there before. He bolted into the fog. Branches scratched his face as he sprinted downhill, but the sound behind him was worse, dragging footsteps, like something pulling its weight along the floor. Not fast, not chasing him, but following with intent. The whisper came again, stretched thin by the fog. "You came back?" He didn't stop until he reached his truck. Even then, he swore he felt eyes on him from the fog. Rowan never returned to Devil's Backbone Ridge. The cabin wasn't on any map, and despite his best attempts, he never found it again. But others kept encountering strange things around the ridge. Elise Turner lived about 30 minutes from the old coal road, far enough from town that nights were quiet and dark. One night, her dog began whining at the back door, scratching furiously. Elise grabbed her flashlight and looked outside. A child stood at the edge of her yard. A boy, thin, soaked from head to toe, hair dripping over his face. He didn't move, didn't shiver, just stared at her porch light with wide, glassy eyes. Elise called out, asking if he was lost or hurt. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head, slowly, unnaturally. Then he stepped backward, not turning around, disappearing into the dark woods. Elise noticed something wrong with his tracks as the beam of her flashlight caught the mud, not footprints, claw marks. She heard the laugh then, wet, bubbling, almost like someone drowning. It echoed through the trees long after the boy vanished. Many locals have seen that boy over the years, always dripping wet, always silent, always backing away as if leading you somewhere. No one who followed him has ever shared their story. The Blue Ridge holds countless such tales, voices heard deep in the hollows, figures glimpsed between the trees, faces that appear in the mist and vanish when approached. Outsiders dismiss the stories, but those who've lived here long enough know better. The mountains echo. They repeat things no human remembers. No creature should imitate. No ghost should know. And these 8 encounters are only the beginning. They call it Screaming Hollow because sound in that place behaves the way shadows do in a broken mirror, bent, jagged, and always coming back from the wrong direction. Even the wind refuses to move through it. People who walk past its border say they feel something in their ears, like pressure from deep water. Hunters avoid the area completely. Birds circle overhead, but never land. Dogs whine and pull against their leashes. But Malcolm Reeves went in anyway. Malcolm wasn't a thrill seeker. He was a wildlife audio recorder, a quiet man with an obsession for capturing natural sounds unexplained by textbooks. The Blue Ridge was his playground. But when he heard about the Hollow, a place where hikers claimed to hear their own voices coming back wrong, he packed his gear and drove straight there. He arrived just before dusk. The tree stood so still it might as well have been a photograph. No wind, no rustling, no distant insects. Malcolm frowned, adjusted the sensitivity on his recorder, and stepped inside. The deeper he walked, the stranger the air became, dense, almost syrupy, like walking through vibration. His own breathing sounded too close to his ears, as if echoing inside his skull. Even the crunch of leaves beneath his boots repeated itself a heartbeat too late. He found the perfect recording spot, a scarred sycamore with lightning marks twisting around it like ribs. Malcolm set his microphone down, clicked on the red recording light, and noted the time. Then the screaming started. It was faint at first, drifting in like a whisper wrapped in wind, except there was no wind, no breeze, no movement. The sound rose sharply, 3 voices overlapping, each at a different pitch. One deep and animalistic, one hollow and human, one high and shrill like metal scraping bone. Malcolm stumbled backward. The voices didn't stay in one place. They circled him. Left, right, behind, above. The hollow threw the sound around like a living thing. Malcolm spun, trying to pinpoint the source, but each direction brought a new angle of the scream. He clutched his recorder like a lifeline. Then everything stopped. Silence. Crushing, absolute silence. Malcolm held his breath. Crunch. A footstep behind him. Slow. Heavy. Wet. Malcolm turned. Nothing was there. Crunch. Closer. He raised his flashlight. Its beam flickered, as though something displaced the air in front of it. Then he saw it. A shape, darker than shadow, crouched low against the forest floor. Not a person. Not an animal. A wrongness with limbs too long and joints that bent backward. Its eyes glowed a flat, chalky white, wide apart, unblinking. It inhaled. Malcolm's lungs expanded. It exhaled. His breath left him involuntarily. The thing was matching him, mimicking his breaths with perfect timing. He gasped once, panicked, and the creature gasped too, a split second delayed, like it was learning how to breathe by watching him. Malcolm ran. Branches whipped his face. Roots clawed at his ankles. The air thickened, dragging at his lungs. But behind him, he heard the scraping sound again, slow, steady, never rushed. The creature didn't chase him. It followed him like it already knew he couldn't escape the hollow. Malcolm burst onto the main trail, stumbled into the open, and scrambled toward his truck. He slammed the door shut, shaking uncontrollably. Only after he floored the gas pedal did he realize the screaming had returned. Faint, distant, but not from the hollow, from the recorder in his backpack. He didn't listen to the file for weeks. When he finally did, he was alone in his apartment. He pressed play. The screams began almost immediately. But midway through the recording, everything shifted. A deep voice, too deep to be human, whispered his name. Not Malcolm. Malcolm. Dragged syllables, like learning the shape of the word. Experts tested the audio. There was no tampering, no overlay, no malfunction. But they all agreed on one thing. The voice wasn't an echo. It wasn't reflected sound. It came from something standing very close to the microphone. Malcolm never went back to the hollow, but others have. Some reported hearing their names whispered from above them. Some heard footsteps pacing in circles around where they stood. One hiker claimed she heard her own voice calling to her from deep in the trees. No one has found a rational explanation, because Screaming Hollow doesn't echo sound. It echoes you. It listens. It learns. It repeats. And sometimes it screams the things no one alive should hear. Some stories in the Blue Ridge don't spread through fear. They spread through warnings. Mothers whisper them to their children. Old men mutter them at dusk. Hunters refuse to say their names past sundown. But none of these tales are spoken with more caution than the one of the bone lantern. Callie Dwyer wasn't the type to be frightened by folklore. A folklore major, she treated legends like puzzles, ancient codes meant to be solved. During her university research trip to the Blue Ridge, she heard repeated mentions of a lantern made of bones that glowed in the woods near an abandoned orchard. Locals refused to say more. Some simply shook their heads and walked away. One old woman spat on the ground and said, "Child, that lantern ain't meant to be seen. If it sees you back, you're already marked." Callie thought it was just superstition. On the third night of her stay, she went looking for it. She followed an old deer path behind a collapsed barn, climbing over rusted fence wire and stepping through rows of rotting apple trees. The moon hung low, a pale smear in a sky drenched with cloud. The deeper she went, the colder the air grew. Even her breath felt heavy, like she was inhaling something old. Then she reached a clearing. Stone markers covered the ground, hundreds of them, arranged in spirals and rings, some toppled, some perfectly balanced on points that seemed impossible. They weren't graves. They weren't cairns. They were markings, symbols left by hands that understood the land before settlers ever touched it. Callie felt her chest tighten as she entered the center of the spiral. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. That was when she saw the lantern. It hung from a dead branch, suspended by a cord woven from something pale and fibrous, something disturbingly close to sinew. Its frame was made of thin bones, brittle and yellowed, vertebrae, finger bones, something that looked like the ribs of a small animal. Inside, instead of a candle, glowed a bluish flame. But as Callie stepped closer, the flame moved, not flickered, turned. Two glowing blue orbs shifted inside the lantern, widening, focusing. Eyes! Callie stumbled backward. Her flashlight dropped to the dirt. Something shuffled behind her. A soft, rhythmic step. Callie froze, too frightened to turn. The lantern swayed gently, not from wind, from breathing. The lantern was breathing. Her stomach knotted. A low hum vibrated through the ground, and the stones in the clearing began shifting. Not rolling, sliding into new positions, forming a tighter spiral around Callie. Her breath fogged the air, though the temperature had plummeted suddenly. Then she heard the footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate, as though something tall was walking with heavy caution. Callie forced herself to turn. A figure stood just beyond the stones, too still to be human, too tall to be anything she knew. Its body was draped in a long cloak, brown and cracked like aged leather. A hood covered its head. Where a face should have been, a carved wooden mask stared at her, smooth, featureless, except for a single slit where a mouth might be. The mask was split down the center, as though something beneath it pulsed, pushing outward. The figure lifted a hand. Callie wanted to run, but the circle of stones had closed around her. The figure didn't move closer. It simply pointed a long, thin finger at her chest. The lantern's blue eyes blinked. A second blink occurred behind her, then a third. Callie realized too late. There were 3 lanterns now, or 3 sets of eyes, watching her, measuring her. The humming grew louder. The ground vibrated. Her vision warped at the edges, like the world was stretching around her. A cold rush surged through her bones, and for a moment she felt weightless, like she'd been lifted out of herself. Then everything went black. When Callie opened her eyes again, she was lying on her dorm room bed, shoes missing, clothes soaked with cold mud, hair filled with leaves, knees scraped. Her phone was in her pocket, though she never remembered touching it. 7 hours were missing. Her roommate found her sitting on the floor, shaking and staring at her screen. Callie couldn't speak. She couldn't explain. Her phone gallery displayed a single photo taken at 3:17 a.m. A lantern, glowing blue, hanging inches from the camera, and visible behind it, reflected in its glassy eyes, was Callie's face. But it wasn't her face. Her eyes in the reflection were white, pupilless, empty, staring back at her as though the lantern now carried a piece of her inside it. Callie dropped out of school 2 weeks later. She left the state entirely. Her professors and friends said she became afraid of the dark, of reflections, of forests, of anything that resembled a lantern. And she still refuses to go near mirrors because she swears on certain nights she sees those blue eyes blinking behind her. Truckers who travel the Blue Ridge Parkway at night learn very quickly that the road has rules. Never stop on an unlit shoulder. Never follow a figure that waves you down. And above all, never look directly at the people who sing without sound. Derek Holcomb didn't believe in rules. He was a long-haul driver with 20 years of experience and an ego as big as his rig. Ghost stories were entertainment, nothing more. He liked to chuckle at the tales locals shared at gas stations. Silent choirs, shadow brides, road walkers. Nothing impressed him, until the night he saw them for himself. It was a little after 2 a.m. Fog clung low to the pavement, swirling around his headlights. Derek was used to bad conditions, so he kept his speed steady. The radio buzz was static, no stations, no music, just crackling emptiness. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second sign appeared on the road ahead. At first, Derek thought a crowd had blocked a lane. Maybe an accident. Maybe hikers in trouble. He slowed, squinting through drifting fog. Then his stomach dropped. A row of people, 20, maybe 30, stood shoulder to shoulder in a long line across the asphalt. Not walking, not moving, just standing. Their clothes were old, dusty suits, torn dresses, stitched shirts that looked handmade, frayed hems, muddy cuffs, faded colors. Some had no shoes. Some were barefoot on the freezing pavement. Derek flicked his high beams on. That's when every single head turned toward him at the exact same moment. Not gradually, not naturally. Snap. All at once, like a puppet master had tugged every string simultaneously. Derek slammed the brakes. Their faces were pale. Too pale. Their mouths were shut tight. But their eyes were sewn closed with thick, black thread, crisscrossing through flesh like stitches on a torn doll. The line of people did not blink, breathe, or sway. Then their mouths opened. W-I-D-E, horribly wide, stretching beyond what any jaw should allow. Their lips cracked. Their cheeks tore. The skin around their mouths split like wet paper. Derek's breath caught in his throat. They were screaming, but no sound came out. The silence hit him harder than a shout ever could. It vibrated through the air, an absence of noise so deep it made his bones ache. Derek felt pressure behind his eyes, a ringing in his ears. His vision wavered. He stumbled backward inside his cab, clutching the steering wheel as though it could anchor him. Then the figure stepped toward him. Not fast, not slow, just wrong. Each step was synchronized, perfectly timed. A collective movement, like a single body split into dozens. Derek panicked. He threw the truck into reverse, tires skidding on the wet road. The line advanced, silent screams widening, throats gaping like dark tunnels. The radio crackled sharply. For one fraction of a second, one sliver time, Derek heard a voice through the static. "They're not singing for you." Then the radio died completely. Derek rammed the gear into drive and floored the gas. His truck lurched forward. As he passed the figures, something unimaginable happened. They turned their open mouths toward the sky, necks snapping back at unnatural angles. And the silence broke, not with a scream, not with a voice, but with a vibration, deep, hollow, like a chorus humming from miles underground. The air around him shuddered, trembling through the windshield, through the tires, through his bones. His headlights flickered violently. The figures vanished, not dispersed, not stepped away. Gone, as though the fog swallowed them. Derek didn't stop driving until he reached a 24-hour gas station 30 miles away. When he stumbled inside, pale and shaking, the older woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She just looked at him with tired eyes and said, "You saw the choir, didn't you?" Derek swallowed. "You know about them?" The woman nodded slowly. "They're not ghosts, and they're not meant to scare you. They're warnings." "Warnings for what?" he asked. She hesitated, glancing toward the dark road. The choir only appears when the mountain is listening, when something else is stirring beneath it. Derek never learned what that something else was. But 2 weeks later, the exact stretch of road where he saw the silent choir collapsed in a landslide so massive it buried an entire hillside. 5 hikers vanished. Part of the old ridge broke away. Locals said it was the biggest slide in 50 years. Some believe the choir appears before tragedy. Others say they appear because something much older than the mountains is waking. But everyone agrees on one thing. If you ever see a line of people standing silently on the Blue Ridge Parkway, do not stop, because the choir doesn't sing for the living. They sing for what comes after. Some stories in the Blue Ridge are about ghosts. Some are about creatures older than memory. Some are about echoes, sounds caught in the ribs of the mountains, repeating long after their source is gone. But this last encounter is about something different, something the mountains themselves remember, because the Blue Ridge is alive in ways people don't understand. And sometimes it wants to show you what it knows. Jonah Merritt was a volunteer search and rescue worker, the kind of man who could navigate the woods blindfolded. He knew every ridge, every river bend, every switchback trail. When hikers got lost, Jonah found them. But the call he received one icy November night was unlike anything he'd handled before. 3 campers had vanished near Black Elk Overlook, a remote cliffside known for strange winds and sudden fog. When their tent was found, it looked untouched, zippers closed, gear neatly arranged, fire pit still warm. No struggle, no footprints leaving the site. Only a single line carved into the dirt beside the ashes. We followed it. Jonah hiked out at first light. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Snow had fallen faintly overnight, but instead of softening sound, it seemed to swallow it. Jonah's radio crackled with static, then died completely. He tried calling for backup. Nothing. When he reached the ridge, the fog rolled in fast, too fast. One moment the world was clear. The next, he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The trees formed silhouettes like jagged ribs around him. Then he heard it, a voice, not calling for help, not shouting, not panicked, just humming, a soft melody, slow and sorrowful. Jonah followed it, thinking when the campers had returned. But the deeper he moved, the stranger the humming became, warping, bending pitch, shifting between distance and closeness without direction. Sometimes it sounded behind him, sometimes ahead, sometimes directly beside his ear. Jonah drew his flashlight. A figure stood in the fog, not moving, not speaking, just facing him. Jonah called out, "Are you hurt? Don't move, I'll come to you." But the figure did move. It stepped backward into fog, gently, silently, just like the drowned boy from Devil's Backbone Ridge. Jonah approached cautiously. Each step he took brought the fog thicker, colder. He could no longer hear the wind. Then he realized something. The figure wasn't leaving footprints. He stopped abruptly. The humming resumed, this time above him. Jonah jerked his light upward, and the world tilted, because the trees weren't trees. Not anymore. Their branches had twisted together into crude shapes. Arms, torsos, crude faces, woven from bark and bone and ancient wood. Moss dripped like wet hair. Empty holes gaped like eye sockets. Carvings spiraled down their limbs. Circles, symbols, lines that hummed faintly with some forgotten frequency. The forest was watching him. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the ground. Jonah staggered back. With sudden snap, one of the tree figures moved, not bending in the wind, not swaying like wood. It stepped forward. Jonah ran. He tore down the ridge, branches whipping his face, snow and leaves scattering beneath him. But the humming followed him, echoing off the trunks, repeating itself deeper each time, layering into a harmony that made the air throb. Then the fog parted, and Jonah stopped so suddenly he nearly fell. The campers were standing in the clearing, all 3 of them, alive but unmoving. Their eyes were open, glassy, lifeless. Their mouths hung slightly ajar. Frost coated their eyelashes. Their bodies were rigid, as if held up by invisible strings. Behind them, the tree figures loomed motionless. Jonah shouted their names. No response. He approached slowly, reaching toward the nearest camper, a young woman with a tear frozen on her cheek. Her lips twitched. Jonah jerked back. Then she whispered, voice thin, cracked, barely audible. "It showed us everything." Jonah swallowed. "What did it show you?" The woman's head turned, not naturally, but pulled, like something behind her moved the muscles for her. And she whispered, "What the mountain remembers, what it keeps, what it takes back." Her breath fogged the air. Then she blinked, and suddenly her pupils dilated so wide they swallowed the whites of her eyes. Jonah stepped away, heart thundering. From behind him, the humming changed pitch, no longer mournful but commanding, calling. The campers' bodies lifted slowly off the ground, feet dangling inches above the snow, spines arching backward as though pulled by unseen hands. Jonah screamed. Stumbling away from the clearing, the forest began to move. Branches twisted, roots heaved. The mountain groaned with an ancient, waking voice. Jonah ran until he reached the trailhead, ran until his lungs burned, ran until the humming finally faded. He collapsed beside his truck, sobbing. The rescue team arrived an hour later, but when Jonah returned with them, the clearing was empty. No campers, no footprints, no carved symbols, no tree figures, no signs of life, only a faint hum in the wind. Jonah never returned to search and rescue. He left the mountains entirely, but he told one final warning before he went. The Blue Ridge isn't haunted. It's listening. It remembers every step you take. And sometimes it wants you to remember with it. Because not everything taken by the mountains becomes a ghost. Some become echoes. Some become warnings. And some never leave at all.